Mortis Maledictum is a cosmic dark fantasy story, and as such may contain content not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Now, enjoy the show.
Here you are again, prepared to turn the page. You know the risk, and know the danger. Let us begin. The vast majority of the world's Jade production is mined in Myanmar. With Quinn's Mortis entropy detector vaporized, he needed to build another one. The Archivist had given him the plans, but while it could see anything at any place on the planet, it couldn't be in more than one place at once. There were disturbances that bore recording in its book. That was why, with nothing more than his backpack and a winning smile, Quinn O'Connell made his way to a jade mine in northern Myanmar. The Archivist told him that he needed something pure and straight from the source, or it wouldn't latch on to the residual energy that saturated Quinn's very being. The Quiven Reamer and the Jade Pages had imbued him with the energy, and it had made him a kind of divining rod for the agent of the Mortis. It would have been a great way to track the creature down if Quinn had been able to access the power reliably. The Archivist built Quinn the original entropy detector, but as it was now in pieces blasted into the side of a snowy mountain in Colorado, it couldn't help him anymore. Ever since the Quiven Reamer's words opened his eyes, he had felt the exponential growth in supernatural disturbances. Things that had slumbered for centuries all seemed to wake at once. Even skeptics had to admit there was something drastic happening in the world. On Quinn's last visit to the Archivist's chamber, the creature told him just how short time was running. During that conversation, Quinn detected something that had disturbed him to the core. He thought he heard fear in the Archivist's cold, calculated voice. Quinn made the mistake of mentioning it, and the celestial being deposited him 30 miles south of the largest jade mine in the world.
I guess I'll just get back to work then,
he said to himself. Most jade mines in this section of the country were open mines, but this one was not. This, the largest jade mine in the world, held rivers of green glass running through the earth. The people who built the mine didn't quarry down to get to the precious stone, but instead followed the twisting streams through the earth instead. In no other place on the planet would such a method have worked.
Can I enter the mines?
Quinn asked a grizzled-looking man standing in front of a trailer office.
Not open for the public.
Quinn had to think on his feet, and all of the things he could have said, and failed. Instead, he found the one path through the manager's defenses. It turned out this man, the day manager, followed one rule, and that was money. It didn't even take much of a bribe to get past him, and he was planning on shutting down the site shortly anyway, as there was a storm threatening. He didn't want to risk a rock slide blocking his way home. That was when the first droplets of rain hit the tin roof over the mine shaft elevator. Everyone except Quinn left. He was bound and determined to go down and find a suitable hunk of jade to replace the one he blew up. He should have listened to the locals. Quinn had the wire harness and battery he needed to hook up to the Jade. He even had the necessary adhesives in his backpack to put it all together, right there in the mine. So when he rounded a corner just a few levels deep, and his flashlight shone on a fist-sized jade spike just sitting on the ground, he picked it up. Putting the device didn't take long either. He powered it up, and a small LED flashed at him. He didn't know how such an ancient being knew so much about modern electronics. nor how it could interface with mystical entropic conductors. It didn't really matter, because the next second, the thought flew away. Fully booted up, the small speaker flared into life. The static was back. This time the pulsing was so tightly knit, it was almost just one long, static tone.
That can't be good.
He wasted no time in getting back to the elevator, riding it back to the first-level security room. He had seen racks of computer screens there showing different video feeds of areas of the mine. They weren't there for the miner's safety, but Quinn wanted to make sure he was alone. He wasn't. There was something on one monitor. There was a flash of splotchy darkness, and then it was gone. The thing moved like a great thin shadow, a shark of darkness through the air of the underground mine. It disappeared between one screen and flashed onto the next. Whatever it was, the thing was traveling down one of the main passages. The miners had built long hallways underground following the streams of Jade, but occasionally they cut little pockets out of the sides, chasing down a sliver that got away. The constant rains made the earth easy to work, but with that, so came rock and mudslides. If Quinn needed any more persuading to get out of the mine, he got it when he checked the video feed on the surface. There he saw the rain, not coming down in the light drizzling from earlier. Now a torrent of wind and water battered the poor camera. Quinn needed to get out now, or risk being trapped in the mine with something more dangerous than he was equipped to handle. Worse than that, if the entropic detector was screaming its static hiss, the Mortis Maledictum's power was nearby, leaking into reality. He raced out of the security room, trying to beat the shadow back to the elevators. Quinn made it. He slammed his finger into the surface button. The doors closed agonizingly slow, and he rose. As it went up, Quinn thought about just how vulnerable he was right at that moment. He was alone, underground in a currently abandoned mine. There was the power of the enemy battering back reality all around him, and something wicked hunted the passages. Worst of all, even if he made it back to the surface, there wouldn't be anywhere to go. He didn't have a vehicle with him, thanks to the Archivist's peculiar transportation, and the rain was coming down in sheets, threatening to wash him down out of the hills. The whole of the mine shook, as though a giant had smashed its hammer against the heart of the world. The lights in the elevator dimmed, but thankfully the cable continued to raise the steel cage. Finally, the door opened, and Quinn leapt out of the mine shaft. He felt the rain on his face, and relief washed over him. It only lasted a second. He closed his eyes and lifted his face to the sky. The rain was cold, but the air was fresh and clean.
Archivist! Archivist, I need you.
Lightning flashed, and thunder followed almost on top of it. The hilltop trembled under another blow from some titanic battle happening just beneath Quinn's feet.
The Mortis is here!
Quinn called, holding onto the outside wall of the elevator to help him keep his feet as the earth quaked. Suddenly, he saw a vision of a beaked creature. It held its book in one hand, scribbling notes. It was the Archivist, and it came to catalog Quinn's find.
There is Mortis energy here, though not so much as your screaming would have me believe.
Awesome. You want to do something about it? Isn't this the whole point?
Quinn replied. The creature looked at him. Rain sluiced off Quinn and soaked his clothes, but the Archivist stood stock still and dry.
The Malus Bastion is the one to battle the Mortis. You must find the Mortis' agent on Earth.
What in all the planes of Mel do you think all of this is?
Quinn replied, holding out the jade spike. The hissing was loud enough to hear over the rain and wind.
The Malus Bastion is here. I am not needed.
It's here?
He looked around as if the great monster and defender of reality would strike him dead then and there. The Archivist held out its free hand, indicating the rain.
Of course. The Apoluvic's work is always in salt water.
Quinn held out his hand to feel the rain. After a moment, he licked his fingers. The water was salty. It was raining salt water. The Archivist never lied, but Quinn had to know. He trusted the creature to be as emotionless and calculating as was necessary to complete its tasks. But even still, the idea that the Apoluvic was there to battle the Mortis shocked him.
Do you feel the earth move under your feet?
Quinn nodded.
That is the Apoluvic saturating the ground. It will break apart soon enough, cracking open like an egg. It is here to expose the rift so it can close it. That is the Malus Bastion's purpose. There is no need to worry. It is matched well to the task.
The Archivist twisted its head, looking off into the distance.
There is another power here. One I cannot see.
That sounded like good news to Quinn, despite the Archivist's ominous tone. Everything it said sounded ominous, and usually when it talked of other powers, it meant some truly terrifying monsters out of legend. As bad as those things were, they still called the world their home and would fight against the Mortis.
I must go,
the Archivist said, disappearing in a swirling flap of a feathered cloak without waiting for any acknowledgement. The rain still came down, and Quinn was still stuck in the middle of it with no shelter except to head back underground where a titanic battle between the two biggest heavyweight metaphysical boxers in the world were currently hosting their slugfest. He was so vastly outclassed he probably didn't even rate as a fly on the wall. Quinn was probably more like bacteria riding on the fly on the wall. There were others here to do the big stuff, and he had had only tragedy hit him when he got caught in the supernatural crossfire.
The Archivist is here. I'll deal with whatever is going on,
Quinn told himself.
Besides, the Epiluvik is here too. There isn't anything I could do that he couldn't.
Why then did Quinn turn away from the road? He could have zipped his jacket up, tucked his hands in his pockets, and trudged off through the rain. He would have eventually gotten to a town, or found a passing car to hitch a ride. There was no need to stay. Quinn rationalized a million reasons why he shouldn't be there. But somehow through all of that, the tiny part of him that drove him into the Quinn Vin Reamer's cave made him reach for the book in Marie Curie's home, and had put him on this collision course. That part of him screamed at his subconscious. Quinn had to turn around. He had to help, no matter how insignificant he was. The ground shuddered again. This time it wasn't the reverberating thrum of before. The shaking continued and grew, propagating like a splintering glass. The muddy ground sluiced around Quinn's feet, slipping down into micro-fissures. There was a voice on the wind. It cried and laughed. Trees leaned over and the rain came down in slamming waves from the gusting cyclones. The ground tried to settle out, but the water forced the cracks wider. Quinn stumbled, looking for somewhere safe to stand. If he was going to retreat, it was useless now. He was resolved to go onward. But when the conflict removed his choice, it gave him a small sense of relief. He ran into the mine's open front carved into the hillside. He couldn't trust the elevator now. The tremors had probably rendered it useless at best. Instead, Quinn ran down the spiraling slope inside the hill until he came back to the security room. He reached for the door just as a deafening crash knocked him from his feet. The entire system rocked and Quinn felt something other. A deep terror welled up inside him. But still, he rose back to his feet. The roar continued. Cracks and rending metal, heralding the mine's death. The Epiluvik had shattered the earth for miles in every direction. The otherness flooded outward from somewhere in front of him. Quinn opened the door to the security room and found himself with rain splattering against his face. He was standing outside again, on the side of a cliffside. The power of the Malus Bastion and the Epiluvik displayed for the world to see. The ground stood open in front of Quinn's feet. The entire hill looked as though a gigantic axe had struck it, leaving a deep V-cut with sheer muddy cliffs on both sides. Water poured into the gap, flooding the bottom. But just above the base, a dark tear hovered. Quinn looked into that rift and saw dark shapes, deep purple and blue, swirling patterns. It was like after images burned into his retinas when he looked at something too bright. This wasn't bright, but the power was there, just beyond his human vision. He imagined what the Epiluvik saw, for it was standing alone in front of the great rift. The sea god looked into the crack in reality, daring anything to come through and directing his waters into great pillars from the ground. They leaned forward at their peaks, moving closer to the rift, waiting. It didn't take long. An army of shapes streaked out of the rift to meet the pillars of water. The columns rocked back and forth, hammering the entropic incarnations to atoms. But there were more than they could handle alone. The Epiluvik summoned shards of ice in great masses, moving with imbued life. They charged forward across the ground to meet the shapes emerging to oppose them. The armies met, and thunderous noise echoed louder than the lightning overhead.
These are what we fight.
Quinn spun to see the Archivist standing in the doorway just behind him.
Leave this to the Malus. You are needed.
With what?
Quinn asked, breathless and in utter shock at the amount of power flung in wanton destruction behind him.
What can I possibly do against that?
There are other powers here, and not all of them are benevolent.
That raised a terrible feeling in Quinn's soul.
The agent?
The Archivist nodded.
Help me find it. Help me kill it.
It was Quinn's turn to nod, but he didn't have the slightest clue as to how. The Ipaluvic was as good as its reputation. It was known for its violence, and its heart was as cold as the ice where its spirit found its birth. It did well keeping the Mortis locked in a stalemate, but it couldn't push it back or close the rift. The Archivist moved in to help in that regard. It flew in on dark wings and began stitching the inky nothingness back up, sealing it away from reality. Quinn stood apart from the violence in the titanic struggle. Instead, he held a sentinel on the edge of the flooded mine. He searched the moving armies for any sign of the other power the Archivist had mentioned. There was simply too much to take in, and he feared he would never sleep again. There were shades flying through the air, and the Ipaluvic had taken on the form of a scarred black shark flying with them. It hit their misty forms, scattering them as it clamped down with powerful jaws. Then, as if it drew Quinn to it, his eyes lowered back down to the ground and spotted something. It scurried across the battlefield, quick as a flash. It roved through the lines of both sides. Racing forward, it hit one of the ice creatures and retreated.
Archivist! The ground! There it is!
The Archivist didn't react. It was using every ounce of its power to combat the rift, and its focus was on its task. After all the searching, something inside him told Quinn that this was the agent. He could almost sense it with an inner call, as though a piece of him were drawn to it. The words of the Celestials welled up within him.
There is one from outside reality who has slithered in. It seeks the end, and it has worked to cause it here.
The words came bellowing from him. His breath gave them life, and yet his voice was not his own. Power flowed through him then. The words contained inside his mind set loose against their enemy. Quinn found he was moving forward, surging towards the battle and the creature within it that did not belong. He held long knives of Jade. Where they came from, he didn't know. They were gifts from the Quivin Rima and made from its fangs. No power, no matter how vicious, could refuse the call to arms. The Chalochiki inside him, buried deep, came forth, binding him with its power. The ink of the Jade pages flowed through his veins. Together, the powers allied themselves to his war cry. Quinn made it to the base of the destroyed mine. Debris was everywhere. He moved past them and waded into the thick of the fight. The Apaluvic's constructs ignored him. They let him pass, and he didn't wait. Quinn didn't stop until he stood face to face with a creature of shadow and hate. It was 8 feet tall at least, and 4 arms reached down to him, their claws extended like needles aimed at his eyes. But Quinn, empowered as he now was, cleaved the monster in two with a stroke of his jade knife. On ground level, Quinn couldn't see the agent scurrying around the battlefield, nor could he identify it. The calling inside his chest kept him pressing onward. He could sense his quarry, and to Quinn's credit, he never faltered from his course. Cleaving his way through countless minions of the enemy, Quinn finally saw it. It came out of the crowd, moving on 8 legs. It had massive mandibles that it used to shatter the ice constructs that it found. The problem was that once you see the monsters behind the spin of the world, they can see you. It turned after destroying the Guardian construct, and Quinn felt its gaze lock with his own. The spider came at him then. Its eyes held an intelligence that slowed Quinn's stride. After all this time, the curtain was coming down, and he had revealed the beast. They met at the base of the rift. The Abaluvic and the Archivist were above them, fully focused on their deadly work. Quinn was alone with this monster. The spider moved in with an eager hunger. It lunged at him, serrated mandibles aimed at his head. Quinn jumped back and brought his left knife up to deflect the massive jaws.
I
will take power from your corpse.
His voice was hard and clicked as it spoke.
It was not yours to begin with.
Quinn stepped forward and slashed at one of the spider's leading legs with his knife. It lifted it out of the way, and then brought it back down to crush Quinn. He leapt to the side.
You're nothing but a spy. You can't stop the Archivist.
The spider shook then, and Quinn had the sense it was laughing.
The power you wield isn't the Archivist's or the Quivin Rima's, though you cloak yourself in its stolen language. Nothing you use is yours to take. It was all stolen.
The spider jumped forward and Quinn stepped aside again, but it was a feint. It spun on its back legs and brought its mandibles back down towards Quinn's face. He only just got another knife up in time, but the edge of one serration cut into his arm. He dropped the knife in pain and surprise.
You lie. The power of the book is the Archivist.
The power was destroyed in my trap. You hold the residue of my strength. Only the Quivin Rima's corruption of it is keeping you on your feet now.
Quinn had never considered that, and it made him feel sick. A nauseous wave hit him. It made sense, after all. How else was he the only person who could track the Mortis' agent? And in that instant, he found dread knowledge within him. The monster's power would not allow itself to kill its master, regardless of Quinn's or the Quivin Rima's will. All the courage, the power, and even the manifested knives were traces of the spider's power's desire to return to its master. It had brought Quinn along, tricked him into thinking his free will decided, but it wasn't him. Before the agent's death blow could fall, the sky lightened. The Archivist had stitched the rift above them together with the practiced care and detached efficiency of a surgeon. Suddenly the Mortis' infinite army was no longer infinite. The spider knocked Quinn to the ground, where he almost drowned in the deep flood waters. By the time he had gone to his feet, it was gone. He searched for it, but there was too much chaos now. The shades still fought on, now with a desperate intensity. The ice constructs battered them to pieces in clouds of ash. There, in a break in the moving bodies, Quinn spotted the spider's retreating carapace. It shot across the battlefield as straight as an arrow. It moved faster than Quinn could have dreamed. The Hyperluvic had landed and shifted back to its humanoid form. It wrenched heads around and dismembered the arms of countless shadows from beyond reality. But it didn't see its doom coming up behind it. The spider closed in as silent as a whisper, in a place louder than thunder. It leapt atop the Hyperluvic and sank its serrated mandibles into the deity's chest. It soared back and forth, looking for something while water sprayed out of the wound. The Archivist landed next to Quinn, shielding him from a monstrous tendril. It wound instead around a staff of pure light. Quinn raised a hand to his eyes to protect them in the glow. The Archivist held its hand, a staff of ash and beech woven together as though they were fabric. Where the tendril touched the wood, it withered.
Where is the agent?
It's the spider.
He pointed through the press of bodies to where Hyperluvic struggled against its fate.
Anansi.
The Archivist cried, and the spider heard its name. It lifted its weight up onto its back legs in a silent challenge before landing atop Hyperluvic. Already wounded, the power seeped away from the god of the sea. Anansi the spider greedily took it all in, and as it did, it added to its already immeasurable stockpile. When the Malus Bastion's mantle finally disengaged from the Hyperluvic, it floated up like a translucent shroud, telling the world that another guardian had passed. Anansi saw the mantle floating and let out a shrill clicking sound, piercing in its intensity. All the ice constructs fought on, but were somehow lesser. The remaining shadows of the Mortis quickly empowered them before. All as one, the entire army with Anansi at its head faced Quinn and the Archivist. With a cry of defiance, the Archivist abandoned the field, taking Quinn with it back to its cave. They had lost.
We don't take sponsorships or ad revenue, and we fund our show solely through the generous support of our listeners like you. Help us keep this show ad-free, and, as a thank you, get access to exclusive episodes by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/mortismaledictum, or click the link in the show notes. Thank you.